Hello, everybody. Welcome into Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Jeremy Lapidus, and today we have a great show for you. Today is going to be a big NFL day because we have reached the first major deadline of the NFL season, that being NFL franchise tag deadline day. So there's been a lot of moves, a lot of franchise tags, a lot of teams deciding not to use franchise tags surprising. So that's what a lot of our discussion is going to be about today. We're also going to sprinkle in a little bit of NBA as well towards the end. But we are going to start our show off with the franchise tag yesterday, deadline today. We're going to continue with Russell Wilson news. He, as you might know, was released yesterday. We kind of mentioned it a little bit in our last show, but I want to do a deeper dive into what that's going to mean, not just for the future of Russell Wilson, but also for the future of the Denver Broncos, what they're going to do at the quarterback position. We're then going to transition into some movers and shakers from the NFL Combine, some of the major storylines that have been coming out of that, especially surrounding Caleb Williams. And we're going to end our show with the NBA, something that I haven't seen too many people talking about, but something that I'm surprised that not that many people are talking about. The Washington Wizards and their ridiculous losing streak. We already had one of those happen with the Pistons this season, and the Wizards are on track to catch them. Maybe. We'll have to see. But stick around, we'll talk about all of that stuff. But before we get into the show, remember that if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net, leave a tip or donation. It'll pop up on the bottom of the screen there for everyone to see. We'll have a little discussion about your thoughts about what we are talking about, and you will be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, and we appreciate that. Again, that link is gsmcpodcast.net. But like I said, let's get right into it. Today is the deadline for franchise tags to be placed on players, and we've seen just a couple franchise tags be used before then. Before today, we saw T. Higgins get tagged. That was the first major move. We saw L'Jarius Sneed get tagged yesterday on a non-exclusive tag with the Chiefs. Something right there that's interesting is that they are exploring a trade with L'Jarius Sneed, a guy who had a really, really amazing year last season, really kept that Chiefs defense together, kept them in Super Bowl contention, eventual Super Bowl champions. Without that defense and without Sneed, I don't think they are even making the Super Bowl. He was a major part of that defense last season, so it's going to be interesting to see if they are able to work something out as far as a long-term contract or a trade with him, and if it does that change what their strategy is in the draft? I think it might. I think if they have to get rid of him, they might go corner in the first round instead of a wide receiver. Obviously, those top three wide receivers are not going to be there at the end of the first at 32. So I think there's a shot that if L'Jarius Sneed is not on the team anymore, and it seems more and more like that's going to be a possibility, or that's going to be how it's going to be, that they're going to end up taking a corner at the end of the first round and maybe a wide receiver in the second or later rounds, like they did with Rashee Rice last season. But yeah, that's L'Jarius Sneed right there. Moving on to today, the franchise tags that have come out. We're going to start on the offensive side with Michael Pittman and the Colts. Another one of those guys that was most likely going to get tagged all along. The Colts were trying to get a long-term deal with him done. He is coming off his career best season, 109 receptions, over 1,000 yards. He stepped into that clear wide receiver one role last season, something that he was kind of trending towards heading into this season, but he hadn't quite reached, and last season he finally reached it. And at the right time. You get a nice quarterback prospect from the limited sample size that we saw of Anthony Richardson and pairing him with a target like Michael Pittman, a big guy that can make those contested catches, especially for a guy like Anthony Richardson, whose main concern coming out of college was that accuracy. Having a big target like Michael Pittman with great hands is going to be huge for him. So him staying in Indy is a he was always going to it was always trending towards him getting franchise tagged. So that's not a huge surprise. Some other big names that got franchise tagged that weren't that surprising. Antoine Winfield Jr. We talked about that a lot yesterday with the signing of Mike Evans, how it most likely meant that the Bucks were going to sign or franchise tag, I should say, Antoine Winfield Jr. coming off that All-Pro season that he had last year. Again, these guys deserve to get paid. All of these guys that got franchise tagged obviously had very good seasons. They just weren't able to make a long-term deal happen. We're going to see that a lot. It's interesting to see how players react to franchise tags because a lot of them hate franchise tags. Some of them are just like, fine, I understand, we'll work on a deal later. But it's interesting to see how all these different players react to this. So Antoine Winfield Jr. was not a huge surprise. Some bigger surprises, though, were people that didn't get franchise tagged. You go and you look at a team like the Dolphins, who decided not to use their franchise tag on Christian Wilkins, the big defensive tackle for them. He is going to be one of the top players in all of free agency, regardless of position. He is a monster on the inside. He's a leader on the defense. He's going to command a lot of money in the offseason to a team that could use a big defensive tackle like that. It's a shame. I mean, he could always come back to Miami. That's still not out of the question, but it won't be on a franchise tag. They're still working towards it. He's going to get paid this offseason, whether it be in Miami or whether it be somewhere else. As well as in New York with the Giants. There were always rumblings around Saquon Barkley, and the big story was that he wasn't going to get tagged. He did not end up getting tagged, and he said he wants to go to Houston. That's number one on the list. It seems like his days are over in the Big Blue, which that sucks. We love Saquon Barkley here in New York, but I understand. Wasn't getting along, was not getting paid for what he was doing. So there's still time. Again, nothing is set in stone with where these guys are going. They've just hit free agency at this point. But the bigger piece of this is Xavier McKinney, the safety for the New York Giants. He is one of the most underrated players in the NFL, honestly. What he does for the Giants defense that quietly was one of the best in the league down the stretch. Now, in the beginning of the year, no. And that's why the numbers don't look that great for the season overall. They were one of the worst defenses in the league at the beginning of the year. But down the stretch, I believe from like week 10-ish on, the New York Giants had one of the best defenses in the league, and Xavier McKinney was a huge part of that. Him playing that safety center field position. He is one of the most underrated players in the league, and I'm surprised that the Giants didn't franchise tag him. That's one of those guys that I was expecting to be franchise tagged, especially in a situation that like the Giants are in, where they're kind of stuck in the middle between they can't really rebuild with Daniel Jones's contract, but they're not good. So keeping around those players like that, I feel, is kind of important, and not franchising tagging him might be their biggest mistake of the offseason. I understand the argument for Saquon, but he wasn't going to be happy with the franchise tag. That was never going to work out. As far as Xavier McKinney, I feel like that might have been a bigger mistake for them. And continuing with this, some more franchise tag news here. Josh Allen of the Jacksonville Jaguars was franchise tagged, the defensive end. He had 17 and a half sacks last season. A guy that went in the top 10 out of Kentucky a couple seasons ago. He's finally, he was up for contract. He got that franchise tag. But what that means for the Jags is Calvin Ridley is out of there. There's a lot of places Calvin Ridley could go. And I think the one that makes the most sense is the one that we don't want. The is Kansas City. Uh, Kansas City again has proved that they don't like paying receivers, and Calvin Ridley is not going to fetch a huge paycheck. He had a kind of down season in his return after being suspended for a whole year and sitting out basically for 2 straight seasons. It wasn't like he was bad, but he wasn't great. And you could chalk that up to a lot of things. You could chalk that up to him being a little rusty. You could chalk that up to the Jaguars' offense as a whole, which kind of struggled down the stretch. There's a lot of mouths to feed in that offense. So it's not the biggest surprise that he struggled a little bit, but people were expecting a lot out of Calvin Ridley last season. I, as well, was expecting a good amount out of Calvin Ridley last season. He is going to hit free agency, and I think he's going to end up in the Chiefs, which once again points to them not taking a receiver in the first round. If you can get Calvin Ridley on your team, you probably don't need to go out and draft a guy like Xavier Worthy that we're going to talk about later on in this episode, like Adonai Mitchell that we're going to talk about later on in this episode, like some of these guys that, they're not going to be guaranteed hits, and you don't want to waste a first round pick on that when there's other positions of need for them as well. So there is quite a lot of news with franchise tags. Like I said, franchise tag deadline was today. The Patriots used a transition tag, which is slightly different than a franchise tag. And the way that it differs is franchise tag, you're basically locking them up for a year. They can't go anywhere. They're yours. A transition tag, what it means is we're going to do a soft franchise tag, I guess, is the best way that I can describe it is the best way I can describe it to make the most sense. They're going to allow him to test the market with this tag on him, and if any team wants to match it, they can match it, and he can choose between the two offers. So that is what a transition tag is. The Patriots use their transition tag. Each team gets one of each. But yeah, the franchise tag deadline is still going on right now. Again, that line is today. The Chargers, excuse me, some other big names that did not get franchise tagged that are going to become free agents, going back to the Chiefs with Calvin Ridley. Chris Jones, they've been working on contract extensions there, and it never seemed like they were going to use the franchise tag on him, but he is going to hit the open market again. Last year, they were able to bring him back a game after the season started, and he played obviously a huge part in that offense. He's a monster on there, so he's going to continue to be a big part in that if they use him. But there's a lot of franchise tag news, along with just some NFL news. A lot of people are getting money off of the books, so there's a lot to break down, and we will talk about that in another episode coming up. Not today. We've got a lot of stuff to get through, but thank you everyone so much for sitting through this first segment about the franchise tag on GSMC Sports and Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. Excuse me, I'm all over the place. We will be right back, continuing with our NFL coverage.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows where 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live, I choose to dip. You choose to fight, or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh, I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Welcome back, everybody. Thank you so much for sitting through that break. If you are just joining us, we just did a quick breakdown of the franchise tag, quite honestly, frenzy that has been going on in the NFL. There's a lot that we had to cover, that we had to get through. Some stuff that we will continue to talk about in later days, and stuff that will have bigger fallouts than just these players being tagged or not tagged. But in this segment, we are going to focus on a story from yesterday, Russell Wilson getting released from the Denver Broncos. A story that has a lot of ripple effects around the NFL, surrounding Russell Wilson, obviously as a big quarterback, what it is going to mean. He's probably, depending on how you rate him, the second or third best free agent quarterback on the market now. It's not a very strong free agent quarterback market, and he was like an average quarterback last year. So we'll get into places he might go, what this means for the Broncos, how much money they're eating is insane. We'll talk about all that in just a second. But before we get into it, remember that if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. Leave a tip or donation with a message. It'll pop up on the bottom of the screen. We'll have a little discussion with you, what you had to say about anything we are talking about today or in the future. Again, that link is gsmcpodcast.net. Like I was saying, we are going to be talking about, Russell Wilson and the fallout that is going to happen with him. He obviously was released last night from the Denver Broncos, a move that a lot of people saw coming, a move that was always on the way. There were signs even as far back as December from last year. He obviously got benched for Jason Stidham, and that basically signaled his time in Denver had come to a close. So adding him in there is a very big move, or getting him out of there is a big move for the Broncos, not only because it's changing the trajectory of their team. You know, when they traded for him just 2 years ago, they were talked about to be Super Bowl contenders. You know, their team was just a quarterback away for so long, and then they went out and they got Russell Wilson from the Seahawks in part of that massive trade package, and it just has not worked out at all for them. So Russell Wilson has been released. They also handed him a fat contract when he signed. I believe it was a 7-year extension or something like that. So that is an albatross of a deal. The Broncos are eating $85 million in dead cap for Russell Wilson in the next couple seasons. They're saving $37 million, but they're eating $85, which is crazy for a player like that. He's going to clear waivers. No one is going to pick up that contract. He is going to become a free agent. And there's a couple ways we can look at this, and we're going to look at this from all angles. We're going to start from the Russell Wilson side of things. And he's kind of in an interesting spot because at this point, being released from a team, he has taken a huge step back from his prime. He clearly is never going to be Seattle Russell Wilson again. That's out of the picture. But he can, if you look at his numbers, he wasn't awful last season. He was average, but he wasn't awful. He doesn't have the same creating ability that he used to have with his legs, and he's not the same. He can still make all the throws, but he's just not as as he's not as good as he was when he was able to make extend all those plays with his legs like he was in Seattle. So there's a couple options for him. Obviously, clearing waivers first. He's not going to get signed to a team probably until after the draft happens, maybe slightly before. I wouldn't expect Russell Wilson to be on a team anytime soon. I'd expect him to maybe not even be on a team until the preseason starts. Now, it's tough to do that if you want to be a starting quarterback. But there's no guarantee that he's going to be a starting quarterback. I think we're going to have to wait for a couple dominoes to fall before Russell Wilson gets signed. He won't be the first one. I think where Kirk Cousins goes is a major piece of the puzzle for Russell Wilson, because there's a couple teams out there that are in that sweepstakes for Kirk Cousins, whose second option would probably be Russell Wilson. You look at a team like the Vikings, obviously, that want Kirk Cousins back. It seems, but if he doesn't come back, I think Russell Wilson is about as the best plan B they can get. They're not drafting too high. They don't really have enough capital or aren't in the right spot to trade up to get one of those quarterbacks. And they don't really want to run it back with Nick Mullins and Joshua Dobbs again, because as magical as it was for Joshua Dobbs in the beginning, it did not turn out too well at the end. So a team like the Vikings is somewhere I could see it happening. There's a very specific set of circumstances that need to happen for Russell Wilson to both be a starter on a team and also be on a roster, to be a starter on the team. The team needs to have a hole at quarterback, and B, it needs to not have too high of a draft pick. Because if you look at a team like the Commanders or the Bears or the Patriots or really those main three, those three have quarterback holes. They're going to draft quarterbacks, and those three guys are better. And then you look at the Broncos at 12, they just cut him. Most likely a move and we'll get into the Broncos a little bit. What that signals to me, at least, is that they're going to draft a quarterback. I think they're going to get J.J. McCarthy, and the Raiders are right behind them. Russell Wilson to the Raiders, I think, could be interesting. I don't think that is a great fit for him, but I think the Raiders are a team that, they went out and they had the Jimmy G experience last year, and that didn't work, and they turned into Aiden O'Connell, Brian Hoyer for a start. It's not the greatest situation, and them and the Broncos, as much as I might not like J.J. McCarthy, the Broncos and the Raiders seem like the heavy favorites to go and get J.J. McCarthy. They seem resigned to saying, hey, we know we're not going to get those top three guys. And then there's a tier jump there. We're not going to get Drake May. We're not going to get Caleb Williams. We're not going to get Jaden Daniels. But J.J. McCarthy is there, who has been in the first round mocks for quite a while now. He got a lot of hype at the Combine, and he continued with his interviews and stuff and what he did. But with the Broncos picking one pick ahead of the Raiders, and they're obviously not signing Russell Wilson, I feel like if the Raiders do not trade up, which they have been rumored to want to do, they've been looking at trading up somewhere in the 5 to 8 range. Not sure exactly why. Maybe they want to secure a quarterback. Maybe they really think the Giants are going to draft J.J. McCarthy at 6, which I have a hard time believing. But it could still happen. There's a lot of things that could happen here. But I think the top two teams for Russell Wilson, at least if he's going to be a starter, that fit that criteria of needing a quarterback, obviously, and not being high enough in the draft order to draft a better quarterback than Russell Wilson, it's going to be the Raiders and the Vikings. Again, Kirk Cousins is a possibility, is out there, and he's going to have to get signed before Russell Wilson does, most likely, because that's going to be the big quarterback market domino outside of Justin Fields. Um, those two need to go first, and then it'll be Russell Wilson as the main prize. The other option that I've seen circulating around the internet for Russell Wilson to do is to wait until a quarterback gets hurt and come in and at the end of the season step up, win a couple games, take him to the playoffs. Comparing him to what Joe Flacco did last season, uh, and that's just not something I see him doing. He seems like he wants to play still. Uh, as much, he's not going to get a big contract. He's going to get closer to the vet min, with incentive laden contract most likely, for a team that needs him. Uh, there's a bunch of places he could go, but I think the Vikings and the Raiders are the top two most likely candidates for him, at least in my opinion. Um, but the Broncos here, we talked a little bit about them. They're picking 12 in the draft there. Right now, their quarterback situation is Jarrett Stidham. Uh, and, they're another team that could go out and they could draft J.J. McCarthy. They could go out and they could try and sign Kirk Cousins. Wouldn't be the first time they went out and grabbed a quarterback from another team like that. The Broncos are in a really interesting position because they're not quite that close. They're not quite a quarterback away. They've traded a lot of pieces away because they've been really bad since that Russell Wilson trade, and it just didn't work out the way it was supposed to. Uh, it's the Broncos are also in a very interesting spot. We talked a little bit about the spot that the Giants are in. The Broncos are in a similar spot. I think they're slightly more. I think they're better off than the Giants are, as far as being set up to get out of that spot. But they're kind of in that same spot where whatever they do, it's going to suck. Um, and it has to suck to get better, unfortunately. That's just how it works sometimes. So I think what the Broncos are going to end up doing is drafting J.J. McCarthy as long as no one jumps them in that order. Uh, we'll have to see what happens, though. This move, as much as we all saw it coming, it does send a lot of shockwaves through the rest of the league. Uh, but yeah, in the coming up segment, we are going to finish off our NFL coverage by talking about some of the draft prospects that rose and fell that had risen and fallen in the NFL Combine over the weekend. We're going to talk a little bit about the big debate over Caleb Williams again. What him not participating in the Combine means, if it even is a big deal. There's been a lot of talk about that. We're going to cover all that and some more NFL breaking news. Some more NFL breaking news right around the corner. Stick around. We'll be right back on GSMC Podcast Network.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
All right. Welcome back. Thank you for sitting through that break with me. If you are just tuning in, we just finished talking about, in our first segment, the NFL free agency frenzy. I guess not free agency, franchise tag. I'm sorry, my brain is all scrambled today. The franchise tag frenzy, the franchise tag deadline for the NFL is today. So everyone that needed to get franchise tagged got franchise tagged or did not get franchise tagged today. We talked a little bit about that. Uh, we just finished talking about Russell Wilson and the shockwaves that is going to cause throughout the league, what that means for the Broncos in specific, where Russell Wilson might end up. In this segment, we're going to recap the NFL Combine. We're going to talk a little bit about some risers, fallers, the big storylines that are coming out of the NFL Combine, and yeah, the summary of the NFL Combine for you. But before we get into it, remember that if you would like to be a bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net, leave a tip or donation. Again, that link is gsmcpodcast.net. You can leave a message. It'll pop up on the bottom of the screen there. We'll have a little discussion about what you had to say for me, you, and everyone watching to see. We appreciate you, anything you can give. We appreciate you watching. Again, that link is gsmcpodcast.net. But like I was saying, in this segment, we are going to talk about the NFL Combine, some results of that, some of the big risers, big fallers, and the big storylines coming out of it. And I want to start with everyone's favorite event, the 40-yard dash, the big flashy event in the NFL Combine. We had a big story with it in this in this combine this year. Xavier Worthy, the wide receiver out of Texas, broke the NFL Combine record 40 time. That was set by John Ross, if you remember, about 7 or 8 years ago. He ran a 4.21. 4.21 40 is insane. That speed that he developed, speed kills on a football field, which is why the 40 in the NFL Combine gets all the hype, because it's the really the simplest one to understand how it translates to football. Speed wins any matchup. Speed kills any matchup. But what you don't want to do, and with Worthy in particularly, I've heard this discussion a lot, is remember, just because he runs fast doesn't mean he should jump up your board. And that's the word of caution that I want to start this off with. He just broke the NFL Combine record for the 40 time. And the last time that happened, John Ross did it, and he had this huge jump. I believe he went like 12 overall to the Cincinnati Bengals that year. And we all know how that turned out for the Bengals. He was out of the league in 5. He was off the Bengals sooner than that. It just was never there. He never was able to put it together. And aside from that speed, Xavier Worthy has a couple other issues in his game. He's still got some drop issues, which you can run as fast as you want, but if you're not catching the ball, it won't matter. You know, he's got some separation issues, which again, if he's running in a straight line, he's gonna get past you. But his route running could use a little bit of work, and he's not really one of those top tier prospects. Heading in, he was projected to go, I believe, somewhere between the second and the fourth round, and after that, honestly, his stock rose. It's impossible for your stock not to rise after breaking a combine record, especially in something as public as the NFL, as the 40 yard dash. So his stock rose. I could see him going as high as 32 to the Chiefs. Now I don't think he's going to go any higher than that, but I think he might have snuck his way into the first round. If not, definitely into at least the third. It's hard to ignore it when you start getting into day 2, especially day 3. It's hard to ignore that speed. I don't think he gets past day 2 after that, which is great. But as far as making him a first rounder, I'm not ready to go that far yet. The other big story in the NFL Combine that that I've been following, at least outside of at least that's come out of it, that's continued to be talked about for the last couple days, has to do again with Caleb Williams. Obviously, Caleb Williams is the guy in this draft. He's touted as one of the best prospects in NFL history. I'm not ready to go that far. I think he's a great prospect. I think what he can do. We just talked about how when Russell Wilson's creation ability kind of went away, he kind of fell off that cliff that we've seen him fall off of. He has a very similar creation ability to Patrick Mahomes in the pocket, and his arm talent is incredible. And whenever you're getting any kind of comparisons to Patrick Mahomes, it's a great conversation to be in. But if you watch what he does, it's not necessarily scrambling, although he does have the ability to scramble as well. Not quite an elite level, but it's more avoiding defense, staying in the pocket. It's more uh, extending plays while still having the threat of throwing the ball, which is something that Lamar Jackson really did this season, helped him secure his second MVP. Instead of running as much as he normally does, he changed his elusiveness into staying behind the line of scrimmage and looking downfield, and that's how he was able to really make that huge jump that we've seen him make and right back into that MVP winner for the second time. Uh, so Caleb Williams has a lot of that already. He has that's one of the most important things you look for, especially with a bad offensive line like he's going to get when he gets to the NFL, especially if he goes when he goes in the top two. He's either going to go to the Bears or the Commanders or a team that trades up to one. Uh, but either way, they're not going to have a great offensive line. So that ability to escape danger, to stay in the pocket, keep your eyes downfield, is something that's going to be really important and something that, regardless of the level, translates. The ability to stay calm under pressure and make those throws is something that's really important. You see sometimes quarterbacks in college run with their run around in the backfield like a chicken without their head, uh, and that's not going to translate. But if you have a guy like you watch Caleb Williams tape, he is able to. It kind of looks crazy when he's running around, but he always knows what's happening downfield. He always is aware of where his wide receivers are and who's open, and that's the most important part. You're not just running around like crazy trying to get open, trying to find a place to make a throw, but that you're still controlling the game even when it looks like you're out of control. And that's what he brings, and that's why he's such a special prospect. Um, but the big talk with him is that he didn't participate in any drills. And quite honestly, I don't get it. There are so many prospects that don't participate in drills. Drake May didn't participate in drills. Jaden Daniels didn't participate in drills. That's just this year. He's not the only quarterback that didn't at the top of this draft class, and we've been seeing it happen more and more in recent years. I believe last year some of the top CJ Stroud participated because he was not in. He was still being debated, but Bryce Young I don't believe participated. Uh, there's a lot of guys especially the highly touted ones, that have not been participating in these drafts, in not the draft, in the combine of recent years. So it's not necessarily a bad thing, and that's what I can't quite wrap my head around. Why everyone is freaking out that he is not participating, and they're not really even coming at him for what he does on the field. They're now coming at him for what he does off the field. Um, they're coming at him for not having an agent. His dad being his agent, kind of, and for asking for ownership in teams, which he's not going to get. Looking for ways around the CBA, which is kind of crazy, but that doesn't affect what he does on the field. You know, this is as much as you want a guy that is the perfect prospect. Everything's perfect, nothing at all. You're never going to have that. There's always something that's like, oh, but and Caleb Williams is no different. But the red flags that have been raised for him, they're not really that big a deal to me. From all reports inside the locker room with his teammates and his coaches at USC, even back to Oklahoma. He loves football. And really, as long as you love football and you're as good at football as he is, that's the most important thing. Uh, if you love it, you're going to do everything you can to play. And keeping him on the field, he's going to do everything he can to do that from all reports. Again, people are attacking his character. They're not really attacking his game, uh, which every single year there's a guy like that. And sometimes it's justified, sometimes it isn't. I think this year it isn't. I think people are trying to find negatives with Caleb Williams. Honestly, I think a lot of people are grasping at straws at this point to try and find something wrong with him. Not that he really is this generational type prospect that you cannot possibly miss on. I think there's been better prospects of late. I think Andrew Luck was a better prospect. I think Peyton Manning was a better prospect. It might be arguable that Trevor Lawrence was a better prospect. I think he's about on that Trevor Lawrence tier. Again, a really, really, really great prospect, but not quite generational. So I'd be curious to hear what your thoughts are for Caleb Williams after the deadline, or not the deadline, after the combine. There were a lot of mixed reports about him, but and I know as the draft cycle continues to go on, there's been more and more people that are like, should he go number one overall? I don't think there's a world where he doesn't go number one overall, but I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on that. But coming up in our next segment, we are going to be talking about transitioning out of the NFL, moving into the NBA. There is another team, the Washington Wizards, that are on another big losing streak. We've seen something like this already happen once this season with the Detroit Pistons. This one hasn't gotten quite as much coverage, but I am going to break it down, see if they could break the record. They've already passed the Pistons for the worst record in the league now, something that if you told anyone in February, they would call you insane. But we'll talk about that coming up in our next segment. Thank you, everybody, so much for tuning in to this episode of Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. We will be right back. Welcome back, everybody. Thank you so much for sticking with me through that break. Like I was saying, in this segment, we are going to finish our show off with the NBA. We're going to talk a little bit about how abysmal the Washington Wizards have been of late, and if they can, contend with the Detroit Pistons for worst losing streak of the season. But if you're just tuning in, we just finished. It's been a big day in the NFL. The NFL franchise tag deadline was today. So there's been a lot of player movement coming around with that. Players that are going to be entering free agency, where they might end up. Some major people that have been tagged on a whole bunch of teams, and players that have been cut as well. We also talked a little bit about Russell Wilson, what his impact on the NFL free agency market is going to be, and what it means for the Broncos as far as the future of their team and their offseason. And we just finished talking about the NFL Combine with Caleb Williams and Xavier Worthy. But before we get too far into this segment, like I was saying, we are. If you want to be a bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net, leave a tip or donation. It'll pop up on the bottom of the screen. We'll have a little conversation about what you think, not just in the chat you are in, but also for all the other platforms that we are on. Again, that link is gsmcpodcast.net. Like I was saying, we are going to be talking about the Washington Wizards and how bad they have been. The Washington Wizards have lost 15 straight games. 15 straight games. They haven't won since January 29th. They haven't won since January 29th against the Spurs. That is more than a month. More than 1 month of losing. Obviously, we had the historic runs of the Pistons when they lost 28 straight games, tying the record for most games lost in a row in any sport. Do we think the Wizards can pass that? The Wizards' next couple games, they have the Magic. They play the Hornets on Friday. That's 2 games in. Where do we think the Wizards are going to win another game? Because looking at it, they play in the Hornets. They have the Grizzlies in 2 games, and the Rockets. If they don't win any of those, you're not looking at winning another game until maybe they play the Pistons again on March 29th. And at that point, that would be 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28. Isn't it funny how that works sometimes? Playing the Pistons for the 28th straight loss, if it gets to that point. The Wizards and the Pistons would be fighting for the worst losing streak of all time, head-to-head, if it gets to that point. That is on March 29th, towards the end of the season. The Wizards have time to do it. And the way that they've been playing, and the way that they've been this entire season, I wouldn't be shocked if it happened. The Washington Wizards have been awful. Not only have they lost 15 straight, but now they are in the basement of the league. The Pistons have a better record than them. Something that, if you said that in January when they were losing, people were saying the Pistons might not ever win a game. The Pistons now don't have the worst record in the league. That would be blasphemous to say just a couple months ago. And now we look at this Wizards team, a Wizards team that had Kyle Kuzma put out a tweet that said, at this point, just don't be that team. In reference to the Pistons. You don't want to lose to the Pistons. You want to be the team that loses to the Pistons. And now the Wizards are in danger of being that team. Of being that team that no one wants to lose to. And they're kind of already at that point. When you have a 15-game losing streak, you don't want to be the team that loses to them. Now the team that that lost the Pistons to end that streak, the Raptors, they do play them 2 games before the Pistons. So there is a shot they don't get there. There's always the chance. But you lose all 12 games in the month of February. You lose the last one in January and the first two in March. 15 straight losses. And they've made some changes. Just Jordan Poole moved to the bench. Jordan Poole, who they acquired in a trade for Chris Paul, has kind of been peak Jordan Poole. Uh, that number one option, him and Kyle Kuzma on the court together are you're always going to get one of those lowlights. He's been moved to the bench, and he started off hot against the Jazz last night. He was really trying not to lose that game. Uh, he had 23 points in his first 10 minutes, and it still wasn't enough. The Wizards are an awful team, a tragically terrible team. Uh, worse than the Pistons that lost 28 straight games. A statement that no one thought they would be saying earlier in this season. It's honestly baffling that multiple teams in 1 year can be this bad. And I don't know if this says more about the Wizards' ownership or the Pistons' ownership or the NBA, that two teams could possibly go on a historic losing streak in the same season. Maybe we see the talent difference between the top teams in the NBA and the bottom teams in the NBA. That's how it is, but there's even more of a disparity in recent years, and especially this season now, with the bad being just so bad. But yeah, I'm not certain that the Wizards will win another game this season. I think at this point the Wizards are going to get to 29 losses in a row. If they don't beat, again, there's lots of options. They don't have the toughest schedule. They have a stretch where they play the Hornets, Grizzlies, and Rockets. Hornets, Grizzlies, Rockets, Bulls, all in a row, with the Heat mixed in there one time. And that's coming right up. If they get past that stretch of 4 games and don't win it, I really don't think that they're going to I really don't think that they're gonna win a game before that record is broken. So this is something that we're gonna keep an eye on, something I'm gonna keep my eye on here, watching the Washington Wizards to see if they can complete the the worst streak of all time. It's always fun. It was always fun with the Pistons, but the Wizards now are challenging them for worst streak of the year. And who'd have thunk we'd have two 20 loss streaks in the same season? That is something that is insane. Something that, as we gear up towards the end of the season, especially, you can't even really call it tanking, is the worst part. Because there's not really, this draft class has been agreed to be one of the weaker draft classes in recent memory. There's not really that top guy that everyone's trying to get. Last season, a lot of the bad teams were kind of shrugged off because they were trying to tank for Wembanyama. But there's no guy like that this season. There's no great number one guy. These teams aren't tanking. They're trying to win, and they're just bad, which I think makes it better. It means these teams are worse, but it makes it more fun because these teams aren't trying to lose. These front offices aren't trying to lose. They gain nothing from losing. They don't gain that big megastar by losing this year, and yet they continue to do it. So it's really interesting the way that the NBA, the state the league is in right now. But yeah, 28 straight losses. If I had to put my money on a game, the next game the Wizards are going to win, I think it'd be against the Trailblazers on April 5th. And at that point, that would be 31 straight losses. That's not a good look. I'd love to take a look at the Wizards' schedule. Who do you think they're going to beat? Obviously, there is a chance in these next 5 games for them to get a win, but if they get to 20 losses, I think they'll get to 30, no doubt. So keep an eye out on that. Thank you, everybody, so much for tuning in to today's episode of Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. I've been your host, Jeremy Lapidus. Remember to tune in tomorrow. We're going to have another great show for you today. We're going to most likely continue to talk about the NFL fallout of the franchise tags, where some of these guys might end up that weren't franchise tagged, and other breaking news tomorrow. Thank you so much for tuning in. We'll be back same time, same place. Bye-bye.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit.